Hey, this is Frederick Hopp. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate at UC Santa Barbara's Department of Communication and researcher at the Media Neuroscience Lab. And today I'm really excited to talk about a computational approach for learning and detecting moral conflicts in movie scripts. Now, the basic question that motivated this research was, what makes a good story? Or even more so, how can we identify a good story from a bad story? And communication research and media psychology have already offered various theories to explain general media enjoyment. But recent research suggests that elements of moral conflict and moral dilemmas, so situations in which moral norms are both upheld and violated, motivate actions, and beyond that, are very important to determine media content appeal. You might be familiar with recent shows such as Breaking Bad, Money Heist, or Dexter, that all feature moral conflicts prominently and were very well received among audiences. However, today there's not really any technology that lets us extract moral conflicts at scale, and furthermore, moral conflict computations thus far have not really been standardized. And we thought that movie scripts offer a very naturalistic context to understand and study how moral conflict patterns evolve over time. Movie scripts are very feature-rich, and also have certain elements that allow computational learning. So for example, over here, you can see an excerpt from a screenplay, in this case from Star Wars Episode 4, and different elements in that screenplay, such as action descriptions, characters, and their dialogue, can be differentiated through their various intonation levels. And in this sense, movie scripts allow us to study various layers of narrative features. And when it comes to moral conflict, we're particularly interested in events, characters, their interactions, and perhaps how they address and raise particular moral concerns through sentences and words in dialogue. At the same time, these elements are very complex. So we had to come up with an abstraction of a narrative that maintains these elements while simultaneously allowing computational learning. And here we find that insights from graph theory and network science are very helpful tools to obtain a high-level summary of a movie script. For example, on the left side, you can see a character dialogue network. In this character dialogue network, nodes reflect characters, with larger nodes indicating that these characters have more dialogue, and edges between these characters simply reflect how frequently do these characters co-occur in sequences of dialogue. And furthermore, we used an algorithm called modularity maximization. Now, this algorithm assigns nodes to particular communities in such a way that connections to other nodes in that same community are maximized, while nodes from different or edges from nodes to different communities are minimized. And as you can see, the largest two modules here reflect the social network around the main hero of the story, Luke, and the other module reflects the social network around the main villain of that story, in this case, Vader. Now, a similar good versus evil split is present in the Matrix, where one network reflects the social network around Neo, and another network reflects the social network around the agents. Interestingly, though, when we look at the first Lord of the Rings, we can see that not always does modularity identify these good versus evil splits, but sometimes also assigns nodes to modules in such a way that these characters appear more frequently within the same plot points. So with these abstractions, I'd now like to demonstrate you our algorithm to detect scenes that are rich in conflict. So we start with a general character dialogue network, in this case, again, Star Wars Episode 4, and then we apply modularity maximization to assign these nodes to different communities. Now, what we hypothesize is that as people process a story, they adapt a similar modularity maximization algorithm to assign characters to different moral communities. And here we reasoned that scenes are likely rich in moral conflict if two nodes from different moral communities are present within that same scene. So for example, a scene where Leia and both Vader are present at the same time. And as it turns out, these are in fact very often scenes that contain conflict. Now I'd like to show you an overview of all the detected conflict scenes in Star Wars Episode 4. If you're familiar with the movie, you will pretty quickly see that most of these scenes contain conflict. For example, as Leia is being caught by Vader, or for instance, as Leia is being threatened by General Tarkin to reveal the location of the hidden rebel base, and eventually the battle between Darth Vader and Ben. However, this only tells us, okay, there might be some conflict, but how do we know whether that conflict actually has a moral nature? To do this, we apply a three-step process. First, we use our recently constructed Extended Moral Foundations dictionary. Now, this dictionary contains a list of words where every word has a probability to be associated with 5 different moral foundations. These foundations can be care and harm, fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, and sanctity versus degradation. Now, when we apply the EMFD to a dialogue of scenes that were deemed conflictive by our algorithm, we then can see, okay, which character addresses particular moral concerns more than other characters within that dialogue. In other words, we can obtain a ratio. Does a particular character stress the moral virtues, care and fairness, or does a character rather stress moral vices, such as degradation or subversion? And once we obtain these upheld versus violated moral norms, we can start computing the degree of moral conflict that is present. And when we talk about moral conflict, we broadly think that moral conflict can fall into 2 different categories. One category could be called within foundation conflict. This type of conflict would be present if the same moral norms from the same foundation are both upheld and violated. So in the first scenario here, killing a terrorist to protect a child is both an act of harm and an act of care. And as you can see on the bottom right, the formula to compute these within foundation conflicts takes the degree to which the same foundation has been upheld and multiplies this by the degree to which this foundation has been violated, and from there subtracts their polarity to get an idea of how conflicted are these moral foundations actually. In a similar fashion, we look at something called between foundation conflict. Now, in this case, we have a moral foundation from one category, such as subversion, being violated, while a moral foundation from a different category, in this case care, is being upheld. In the scenario, disobeying the commander to save innocent lives is both an act of subversion and an act of care. Now, in a similar fashion to computing our within foundation conflict, we can compute the between foundation conflict, but now multiply the scores from different moral foundations. We can also look at these moral conflict patterns using a matrix. In this matrix, every row represents the degree to which the foundation has been upheld, while column labels reflect the degree to which this foundation has been violated. And by looking at this moral conflict matrix, the diagonal or the trace of that matrix reflects the degree of within foundation conflict, whereas the upper and lower triangle of that matrix capture the between foundation conflicts. And to give you an idea of how these moral conflict matrices look like, I'd like to show you some examples from Star Wars again. So in scene 16, for example, we can see that the highest degree of moral conflict is present within the loyalty and authority foundation. And if you look at the dialogue of that scene, this actually makes sense, because Vader accuses Leia to be a traitor, which is a clear violation of loyalty, and also accuses her to be with the Rebel Alliance. And if you interpret Star Wars in a way that the rebels kind of the violation of authority, then this also explains why we have this degree of subversion present in this sense. I'd love to go over the other scenes as well, but in the interest of time, I unfortunately have to move on. Where are we taking this work? First, I think we showed that character dialogue networks and modularity maximizations are promising methods for extracting moral conflicts from stories. We further aim to enhance our speaker and listener identification in script dialogues to get a better idea of who is actually talking to whom in this particular dialogue. We're also interested in seeing how well do our detected moral conflict patterns predict movie performance, such as box office sales or Rotten Tomatoes scores. And furthermore, we seek to identify where are moral conflict present within the same module. And to kind of address that question, we probably have to adopt a more fine-grained, higher resolution modularity maximization algorithm. Likewise, we seek to extend our moral conflict detection pipeline to more unstructured text data, including novels, song lyrics, and perhaps even news stories. And finally, we are interested in validating and examining how do these mole conflict patterns actually motivate audiences to maybe select the same movie, how are they being processed, how does that evaluate their perception of the story. And with this, I'd like to thank my amazing collaborators. This has been a really fun project. I also want to thank our funding agency, the John Templeton Foundation. And if you're more interested in this and similar work, I'd like to recommend you to check out our Moral Narrative Analyzer platform. And finally, this work is currently under review in media and communication and hopefully in press soon. Thank you.